It's the second week of August 2025. Rebecca Black is playing Friday to thousands of fans at Lollapalooza, and Edward Sharpe's Home is the song of the summer. Also, this is BV Weekly. I'm Dave. I'm here with Andrew to answer burning questions like, was Stomp Clap the defining hipster music of 2010? And is rock back? What's up, Andrew?
Not to mention, Gautier's somebody that I used to know is playing at Coachella because of Doechii.
Oh, yeah, good point.
I mean, Lollapalooza.
Right, same difference. It's good seeing you last night.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for coming.
Yeah, so last night I journeyed to Astoria, Queens, which actually took me an hour and a half each way on the train, just to go see Andrew introduce the Brian Wilson biopic, which I had never seen. So bonus, I got to see that. It was at a brewery. They like put a screen on the back of the wall. It's part of this series of movies they do there. And yeah, Andrew, you were the special guest. It was nice.
Thanks.
Despite my 3 hours of commuting.
I'm sorry it was such a long commute. It was fun. I mean, it was Love and Mercy was the movie, and I think it's some of the best, even though it's a biopic, so I guess it's not a documentary, but I think it's some of the best just like film about Brian's life, and one of the best biopics I've ever seen about a musician. So it was I haven't seen it, I don't think, since it came out, so it's fun to see it again.
Yeah, I definitely recommend. I had never seen that movie, and obviously you chose it for this screening because of the timing, Brian Wilson's recent passing, and it was great to see it in that context now. So I definitely recommend, if you haven't seen Love and Mercy, go check it out now. It's great timing to do so. So what else happened?
So if you're as terminally online as me, I guess what happened this week was somebody on Twitter or X or whatever had posed the question, what's the worst song ever? And there were a lot of answers, and somebody quote tweeted it and put the Tiny Desk video of Edward Sharpe and the Magnetic Zeros doing Home. And then that prompted all this discourse around the song Home and about like, is this song terrible? Like some people were like, oh, like, you know, this was bad then and it's bad now. Some people were like, oh, come on, admit we all like this. And then that just started like its own discourse about that song and about Stomp Clap music in general. And if Stomp Clap was like what all the hipster indie people listened to in the late 2000s and early 2010s. And then a lot of other people were like, hey, like, you know, bucking against that. And we're like, we didn't listen to that. We listened to all of this. And so now there's like discourse about what the indie rock of that time was. And so, yeah, that seems to have defined a lot of this week for me. At least every time I open the Twitter app, that seems to be the first thing I get bombarded with.
So I'm not as up on the Twitter discourse as you, but I did see it and I tried to catch up, especially before we just started recording. I'm very aware of the Edward Sharpe Tiny Desk because this is actually not the first time that video has gone viral. I remember another time, I don't even think I saw it the first time it went viral. This goes back 5 years on TikTok, but let's say maybe a year ago, 2 years ago on Instagram, it became viral as well, or at least viral enough that I caught it. And it's a compelling video, I will say. So it doesn't surprise me that, discourse aside, that video has risen to the top once again. Something about it, you can't look away.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of like looking at a car crash. I mean, I don't think that song is that bad. I don't think it's the worst song of all time. It's catchy. I don't really like the band, but you know, I don't mind the song if it comes on.
It's not the worst song of all time, but it has those qualities of I want to call this the worst song of all time.
Yeah, I mean, I'm having these thoughts of like, wait, is Edward Sharpe going to be like Gen Z's Nickelback or something? Like, is this going to be the band they just pile on?
I just think every worst song of all time is also the best song of all time that no one wants to admit is the best song of all time.
I mean, I do like How You Remind Me by Nickelback. So,
and as we were saying, most mocked song of all time, Friday by Rebecca Black, just days ago, thousands of people dancing in joy to it, reclaiming that as exciting. at Lollapalooza. So
I mean, the amount of times I watched the Friday video when it came out, it's probably like this, where you're like, it's strangely addictive. Um,
exactly. Same.
yeah. But yeah, I mean, I think with this particular Tiny Desk video, like outside of the song, it's like it just really captures millennial cringe. You know, like they look like such goofy hipster wannabe fake folky hippie things. And so I think it's this combination of like, if you are younger than a millennial, you're like, ah, see, this is what's wrong with millennials. And then if I'm a millennial, so like if you were there and you were the right age, like I think it's this kind of, it's like looking at old photos of yourself and you're like embarrassed, but it's also sort of strangely fondly nostalgic, you know, like
They also just look like, I don't know. I don't see hipster when I look at them. I see hippies. I realize the music may have somehow fallen under this hipster umbrella. I don't totally agree with that either, but I see hippies.
well, I'm just trying to explain why I think the video is so watchable. I think it looks like a bygone era and it looks like an embarrassing element of that era. And I do think this kind of ties into this conversation people are having now, which is like, you know, I'd seen a couple tweets that were like, oh, like stomp clap is what everybody liked at that time. And then there's people being like, stomp clap is definitely not what everybody liked at that time. And I just think it's kind of interesting to see that era of indie or hipster music or whatever you're calling it be painted in, I guess, what feels like kind of a reductive light. I mean, we both remember what that era was like for indie. It was definitely a lot of things at once. I think it was very easy to tune out the stomp clap stuff if you wanted to. I don't think it was very popular, but I don't think it was like unavoidable. I think there were just so many different niches under that big umbrella, and you could be part of whatever one you wanted to be. So that's my response to the people who are saying like, that's just what it was. Everybody liked that. It's like, well, definitely not. But I also think if you're one of the people saying nobody liked it then either, I'm like, well, that's also false. And like, you know, what I think it was not as far removed from quote cooler music than some people are saying it was. I mean, you went to go see Edward Sharpe and the Magnetic Zeros out of curiosity in 2009.
Yeah, I mean, I'll read a piece of my review, which I wrote just months after that song came out. When I went to see the band at Music Hall of Williamsburg, we photographed the show too. This is actually a post up on Brooklyn Vegan from 2009. And it's actually my memory of both of them together is from that show isn't as clear as my memory of them from the video is, but looking back at those photos, it's like, oh yeah, I saw those people. But here's what I wrote at the time. I stopped by Edward Sharpe and the I stopped by the Edward Sharpe and the Magnetic Zero show at Music Hall Williamsburg when they were in town. I was especially curious to see what all the fuss was about. The show, much like the two Ed, aka Alex Ebert of I'm a Robot, is played in New York City this week, sold out well in advance. I left the show with mixed feelings. It was a while ago, but the thing I remember the most about it, I guess I wrote this a little months after the show. The thing I remember the most about it, besides the theatrical aspects of it, I mean that in a school play kind of way. Actually, if I had to review the show in one word, I would choose the musical Hair. Was the insane crowd. I barely knew they existed, but the extremely packed Brooklyn venue was going crazy and singing all the words. It was one of those rare shows where the audience honestly demanded an encore. The cheers for the barefooted, hippie, Devendra Banhart-like frontman to return to the stage were deafening. Anyway, if you're wondering if this band was already popular, like right when that album came out that this song was on, they were. But I also feel like what my review reminds me is that I, who was very immersed in what you might call hipster culture at the time and hipster bands, and who my favorite bands, which we'll probably talk about in a minute, were not this band. This band was, my reaction at the time was, whoa, where did these people come from? How do they know this band? There was some otherness going on here.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And who opened that show is Local Natives, who I
Yeah,
think
which
would have been considered a much more cooler hipster approved band at that time.
well, not partially, at least on my radar, Local Natives at this point had played Brooklyn Vegan shows just as they're starting. This is a band we were championing from the start, and maybe that's part of the difference. I'm like, who is this band, Edward Sharpe? How are they already filling this 600 person venue? And I don't know about this music, but like Local Natives, I'm going to see when they have 10 people in the venue and then they're rising. And now they're the opener on this tour. But yeah, I wrote in this post, openers on the tour and at these shows are the quote great Local Natives and Fool's Gold. So yeah, I'm like excited about Local Natives while questioning Edward Sharpe.
And I think zoomed out, Local Natives and Edward Sharpe aren't that different.
No, I get
Like,
that.
yeah. I also saw another tweet that kind of talked about how like Fleet Foxes and Bon Iver kind of paved the way for some of this stomp clap stuff, which I definitely agree with. And I think that the bands we don't like Lumineers and stuff, just took it to a place where it was a lot less interesting. But, it was like I think at that 2009, 2010 kind of point, there wasn't like as much of a clear line drawn. Like, I mean, I'll admit, like, I liked the first Mumford & Sons album for a bit, like that. I thought that was in a similar ballpark to Fleet Foxes and Bon Iver, and I liked The Tallest Man on Earth a lot, and that would be in there too, I think. And then you kind of got to the point where like Father John Misty went solo. He was the drummer of Fleet Foxes before that, and he like made this comment of like Mumford & Sons is just like 80s arena rock with acoustic guitars, something like that. And it was like, ooh, like now there's like a line drawn in the sand, like and I think that's how a lot of this versus that music rivalries kind of start, right? It's like just something like that, like, what would be it Oasis versus Blur or something. And then I also think part of it was when the Mumford Lumineers kind of stuff got really, really popular is also when Fleet Foxes and Bon Iver made records that kind of proved they were way smarter. So I think like that also ties in, is it was like, it seemed to me like they were making albums that were like really rejecting the really popular stuff that was clearly influenced by them. I mean, even Arcade Fire's Wake Up is like an obvious predecessor to like the Stomp Clap Hey thing. And but it's like when you're zoomed out, like, is Wake Up by Arcade Fire and like that Big of Monsters of Men song really that different sounding? Like, they're really not. But the nuance, I think, when you dig a little deeper, it emerges. In any case, I do think it'd be fun to kind of look at what indie music or indie rock looked like in that period. I think if we say 2008 to 2012, this is kind of that transition moment where it's like the tail end of like the early mid 2000s indie boom, and it leading right up to the point where the lines between indie and pop music are very, very blurry. I also like, I haven't read it yet, but I do think it's worth shouting out that Chris DeVille from Stereogum has a book coming out about this exact topic. So I'm really excited to read it. It's called Such Great Heights, named after the Postal Service song. But I would imagine that this type of stuff is talked about in there based on what I know so far. In any case, yeah, I mean, that late 2000s, early 2010s period, there was like so many different things going on. And like I said, like the Stomp Clap stuff was happening, but you didn't need to be paying attention to it. Like it was also totally the era of like the psych pop art rock stuff, like Animal Collective, Grizzly Bear, Dirty Projectors, Beach House, Deer Hunter. Who to me, I mean, they were doing like a version of indie that was just so rooted in like, I don't know, like really like well studied, like intellectual kind of like very artistic rock music. And then on like a different end of the spectrum, that was kind of like the lo-fi boom era too, where like you had bands like No Age and like early Waves and Best Coast and Real Estate and stuff like that, where like it was this like almost almost like a rejection, I think, of like the more polished stuff where it was just like this very simple kind of like shitty on purpose recording. And so like I know a lot of people were big into that at the time. Chill wave was also big at the time. There was like a shoegaze revival happening with like pretty much the whole Captured Tracks label, and bands like Pains of Being Pure at Heart and Yuck, I think, were at least like shoegaze adjacent. You also had like the very early beginnings of alt R&B with like things like James Blake and How to Dress Well, and like the XX, I think, kind of influenced that a bit. Like at this point, Frank Ocean and The Weeknd still seemed more related to indie than to pop. I mean, I don't want to just keep we can, you know, there was more, but there was a lot of different stuff happening in indie at that time, I think. And I think if it's to see people kind of like talking about, you know, what was the prevailing thing, like I think if the way I remember it is that there were just all of these things. Like it didn't feel like, you know what I'm saying?
Oh, I know what you're saying, but I'm even more extreme than you, because you're opening the possibility that were all these things, and I'm kind of saying no, there were only the things that you just listed. The other things again were like the other. Like I'm not totally serious as a real person, but from like the snobby Brooklyn vegan point of view, you just named music that was accepted and that I considered indie, and that our scene, if you want to call it, considered indie, whereas like Edward Sharpe didn't feel part of that. Mumford Sons felt part of it for a second, but then we're like, oh no, actually, never mind. You know, that kind of thing.
Right. And I think at that time too, like it's, and I think this is part of like, you know, each generation comes in and rejects a lot of the previous generation. I think that it was just like snobbery was way more like in vogue then. Like it's not now. You don't see people drawing these kinds of lines the way they were back then. Like I think it was such a snobby time where it was like you were in or you were out, you know, and that, I don't know. I mean, I think part of the reason it's not like that now too is because I like messed up a lot of people, you know, like including music, especially including musicians. But it was just like this cool club mentality that I think it doesn't really exist so much anymore. And maybe if you weren't like looking, like paying attention at the time, or if you were too young to be noticing it at all, like it might not fully realize how prevailing that was at the time. Like that was such a thing. And it's really not like that anymore. I mean, now we're in the era where Sabrina Carpenter is getting great Pitchfork reviews and playing Lollapalooza and nobody's blinking an eye. Like you're talking about a time when Edward Sharpe and the Magnetic Zeros was maybe considered too mainstream. You know, it's a lot different now.
Well, another great example of that, to continue on this theme of bands that were accepted by quote hipsters. 2000, this era, this Edward Sharpe time was also a time when we were listening to Fucked Up, Titus Andronicus, Cloud Nothings, Japan Droids. These were punk bands that were considered hipster accepted, while ignoring bands like, I don't know, Title Fight. Maybe you could expand more on that.
Well, if we're plugging upcoming books, like, may I? I have a book coming out next year on Clash Books called Emo Revival, and that's kind of...
We didn't plan this.
Right. Yeah. This is completely off the cuff. But I get into a lot of that. And yeah, it was like, I have like a whole chapter dedicated to what was really the difference between bands like Cloud Nothings and Japan Droids and bands like Joyce Manor and Title Fight and the Sidekicks. And I mean, the answer to me, musically speaking, not much at all. Scene wise, that was what it came down to. It came down to what label you were on, who you toured with, how you were perceived. And I think, again, that's something that's gone away a lot, but that is like, you know, I mean, that a lot of bands just got burnt by that. Like it was, if you were able to make it into that hipster hive mind cool club, there were so many more opportunities available to you than if you had a really strong fan base, but just weren't perceived that way. Like there were festivals that didn't want to book you if you were just perceived as a different type of band.
It didn't always work out well for the bands that were inside in the long run, though.
No, I mean, shout out Symbols Eat Guitars, Joe, who does our theme song for this show. I think Joe is someone I've talked to a lot and about this. And, you know, he talks about the way that hipster hive mind really chews you up and spits you out. And Symbols Eat Guitars got spit out, you know, like, and it happened before they made what I think is their best record. So they were like struggling to have the same like frenzy around them for Lose, their 2014 album, I think is their best, but it's their 2009 debut, Why There Are Mountains, that got that cred, that they got that lo-fi boom cred. You know, those bands like No Age and Real Estate and Woods, like, and stuff like that, like they got to be part of that, and then they got spit out and they made an even better record, and they were struggling to get the attention that they had gotten 3, 4, 5 years earlier.
Right. So for full circle, 2009, Symbols Eat Guitars, Best New Music. 2009, Edward Sharpe, total pitchfork pan, line in the sand.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And that was the thing. It was like, I feel like people definitely talk about this with Pitchfork at that era, where like they could make or break your band, and they definitely chose some bands to break, the negative sense of the word.
At least in popularity, they maybe didn't break Edward Sharpe.
Right. That was also, I mean, again, you're talking about seeing this packed show with these huge fans, and it's like, you know, it's that, I think that's when you get into that conversation of this is what people were listening to versus this isn't what people are listening to. It's like, well, what are you really talking about here? Like, the band was popular, people were listening to it.
Yeah.
But then if those people weren't the same people that was deemed cool by, you know, Pitchfork and Brooklyn Vegan and Stereo Gum and stuff, then, you know, that's a different conversation.
Right. And for a little more context, I looked back. Pitchfork actually didn't post that review, that pan of Edward Sharpe's album that this song Home is on, until like 6 months after it came out. That review I just read you from Brooklyn Vegan, where I said they're already popular, people are singing along and screaming for an encore, was months before that pan even happened. So yeah, this was a case where Pitchfork was like, no, that stuff all these people like, it's bad. But like, I don't think that it may be affected Edward Sharpe a little. People, some Edward Sharpe fans maybe went into the closet, but their popularity in general, I don't think it probably affected.
They also reviewed the first Mumford album 4 or 5 months after it came out. And which is like, again, it's like, I don't know if that still happens that same way, but it makes it feel like the band was taking off and they were like, you know what, fuck this. Like, I don't know. I mean, maybe it wasn't that way. I don't want to.
Is there a recent pan of Benson Boone count?
Yeah, that's, I mean, he's like I recently described him as like, he feels like the safest person to make fun of right now.
Definitely.
Yeah. So it's like, I don't know. Like it'll be interesting to see if in 10, 15 years, people emerge that are like, oh, wait, like I liked Benson Boone at that time, along with all the stuff that you liked, you know. But hey, I mean, we could talk about this probably for 5 episodes straight. So I think to wrap up the indie thing, I think what's really interesting about that 2008 to 2012 period is I think that's kind of the last moment that indie was like this very distinct subculture. Because I think in 2013, a big turning point comes when you get major label debut albums from Church's, Haim, the 1975, and Lord. And a lot of people are calling them indie or alternative, and they're showing up on these lists by these tastemakers that we're used to seeing, you know, take stands against stuff that was too mainstream. And then when you listen to those records, you're like, this doesn't really sound that much different to me than just regular pop. I mean, it's almost funny to think now that, do you remember that Is Lord an Alternative Artist headline? Like, it's funny to think that anybody ever debated that. Lord is obviously a pop star at this point, but like, if you weren't paying attention to 2013, there was a lot of discourse about, is Lord alternative? So I think that kind of was like the nail in the coffin on indie as like a really, really noticeable subculture. Not that underground rock went away, obviously, but also indie like like sort of indie coverage deprioritized rock and guitars and that kind of stuff at that point too. A lot of indie was synth pop or R&B, which is great. It was great to expand the definition and, you know, like you saw festivals start booking all kinds of different music, and it was good because for so long it was like you're only invited to this festival if you are sound something like Pavement, and then that changed, and that was great. And then the mainstream was also deprioritizing guitar driven rock music. Like I think the end of the 2000s was probably one of the last times that we really saw like a lot of rock bands on major labels. And of course there has been Is Rock Dead think pieces, discourse, etc. for the last 15 years. Like we're all way past being tired of it. So what's interesting now is after exponentially high numbers of Is Rock Dead think pieces, now we're getting Is Rock Back? And
You're right.
and so, and it has something to do with like really big metal bands like Ghost and Sleep Token. But it also, I think, has to do with like Olivia Rodrigo and Chapel Roan, who are pop stars, but who are putting on rock shows. I've seen both in the past year or so, and they have a full rock band that is on stage the entire time, and it's part of the show the entire time. It's not a prop like you sometimes see, like, oh, bring out the guitarist for like this one solo at a show that is otherwise just a vocalist and backing tracks. It's a rock show. And then Olivia, as one of our favorite topics in the history of this podcast, has been talking about Olivia's alt rock collabs. And, we've talked about her. I saw her when she brought out David Byrne of the Talking Heads. We talked about her bringing out Robert Smith from The Cure. And now she brought out Weezer at Lollapalooza this past weekend. And they played Buddy Holly and Say It Ain't So together, songs that are 31 years old. Last year, she joined No Doubt at Coachella and played a song that was probably 30-something years old. So yeah, it's like you have Olivia, who is this total Gen Z, Gen Alpha target demographic pop star, and she's like, she's literally bringing Weezer, The Cure, Talking Heads on stage with her. And I think that probably has a lot to do with rock music coming back, right? Because like I remember being young and seeing Nirvana bringing the Meat Puppet. I didn't see it happen in real time. I was not that old. I was too young but I saw later when I got into Nirvana, like watching them bring Meat Puppets on stage at Unplugged and just being like, well, now I have to go listen to that Meat Puppets album with those songs. So how many like young kids are maybe checking out Weezer's Blue album because of Olivia Rodrigo? I would wager the answer is a lot.
Do you also need to give Post Malone some credit here? I mean, how just not that long ago that he was considered a rap artist, and then he's out there covering Nirvana.
Yeah, probably. Or even just like whoever is selling all those Nirvana t-shirts that you keep seeing around.
Right. And I don't want to bring country back into this, but obviously now Post Malone has become a country artist and Beyonce did a country album. But we're also having this conversation at the same time that two of the biggest tours are Oasis and My Chemical Romance.
Mm-hmm. And I know that My Chem, for sure, it's not just millennials going to see like their old favorite band. It's a lot of people that were too young to see them the first time around. I don't know what Oasis's age demographic at the shows are like, but I'm positive that My Chem is like, I think, but probably, I mean, just that both are some of the two biggest tours in the world. Like, I feel like they're becoming the current classic rock, like for me, I remember like being a teenager in the early mid 2000s and so many like millennials at that time walking around wearing like Doors t-shirts and stuff. And I think, and Green Day, obviously you have to mention, I think with the Oasis My Chem thing, like it's like you see these young people in like Green Day and My Chemical Romance shirts. And it's like, I think that is like the Rolling Stones of now, like what the Rolling Stones were in the 2000s and 90s and stuff. Like now it's My Chemical Romance, Oasis, and Green Day. And I'm sure that coinciding with something like Olivia Rodrigo bringing Weezer on stage or joining No Doubt on stage, I'm sure that people are connecting those dots, like the same way that when I was listening to Green Day as a young person, when they were like the biggest current band in the world and they were covering My Generation, and then I'm like wanting to listen to The Who,
Right. I'm also just going to try to figure out what Korn's crowd was like at Lollapalooza this past weekend. Do we know?
I'm desperate to know. I did see an amazing picture on Twitter of a shirt that said Korn, and the OR was the Olivia Rodrigo OR, but the KN was the Korn KN.
Yes. Chicago Sun-Times addresses some of what I'm wondering here. I'm going to read their review from Lollapalooza. While most of the Gen Z heavy crowd packed shoulder to shoulder to see Rodrigo and got their own 90s dose with surprise guest Weezer, the smaller faction that did stay for Korn were absolutely prepared when Davis screamed, "Are you ready?" at the top of Blind to kick off the performance. They say later, there were thoughts that Korn's addition to the lineup might have the phenomenon of Deftones in 2024 that unexpectedly drew a massive swarm of people as a new generation has been gleaning to the act that got its start in the same league as Korn. While there were some obvious Perry stage carryovers, maybe remembering Korn's collab with Skrillex, the crowd was a pretty typical representation of the old guard.
Deftones definitely were floating around in my head even before you. I didn't. That's funny that they got mentioned because yeah, I mean that's like I said. Like I mean, we talked about this when they put the new song out, but like you never know what band is going to get their second wind. I mean, I don't even know if we saw Oasis playing 2 stadium shows in New York or New Jersey in 2025, right? Like, and then Blur, their former rivals, are a lot less popular. You never know, I guess, but.
Enough of these old bands. Let's talk about some new music that's out this week. What new albums do we have?
Well, if we're wondering, how much of a gateway like Korn on Lollapalooza, Sleep Token Go's popularity will lead to underground metal, it's a good week for that with Blackbraid 3, the third album by Blackbraid, who's an indigenous one-man black metal band from the Adirondack Mountains. I spent a good amount of time in the Adirondack Mountains, and I would say that you can definitely visualize it listening to this record. It starts out with the crackling of a campfire. There are birds chirping on the album. There's flute and acoustic guitar to sort of signify like the more woodsy stuff. And then there's also just like some of the best and most accessible melodic black metal around right now. I think even in a year with a great new Death Heaven record, this is one of the most accessible and best black metal records. So I really do hope that, I mean, Blackbraid are definitely getting up there. They're definitely like consistently rising, but I hope this one reaches some of the people who don't dive into the depths of black metal.
Yeah, this is Blackbraid's third album in a series, if you want to call it that. And I only say that because it's titled Blackbraid 3, which follows Blackbraid 2.
I mean, he's just doing the Led Zeppelin thing.
Right. So, and all 3 albums are definitely worth hearing. The thing that comes to mind with Blackbraid is intensity. The intensity is high on this album, and it, grabs you the whole time. But that wall of sound that just never relents but contained within this kind of roller coaster ride of riffs. And I think that last part is probably what really appeals to you, right?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely love the melodic riffs, and that's something I look for a lot in black metal. Like, I feel like one of the reasons that black metal is liked by a lot of people who don't identify as metalheads is because the music is just really beautiful. I think it like in the way that shoegaze and post rock and stuff is like, it makes sense that there are bands that like Death Heaven that actively combine those genres, but it's like even without bands like Death Heaven, I think there's a shoegaze and post rock element to a lot of the music in black metal. So yeah.
I also think of Blackbraid's live show, which I've seen, where the intensity, I mean, it's just like the album, they really deliver live. And it's a full band live. They're also in outfits. The indigenous theme is there with just really intense black metal being played really loud, and occasionally some flute, which the frontman is also very good at live.
I'm definitely trying to catch that tour with Lamp of Murmur,
Yes.
who I think it's the same backing band live. And they're like another one of the best black metal bands right now, or most accessible and best. And it hits New York the same day as CBGB Fest and the day of All Things Go with Dochi. So a lot of competition, but I don't know. I might end up at the Blackbraid Lamp of Murmur show. We'll see.
I cannot miss that CBGB Fest, I gotta say.
Maybe I'll run into you, maybe I won't.
What else is out?
I guess I love the topic of like mainstream things that introduce people to non-mainstream things. So that leads right into Ethel Cain's new album being out this week. This is her proper sophomore album, because earlier this year she put out Perverts, which she doesn't consider her sophomore album. It's like some kind of side thing. I don't know, EP, mixtape, whatever. But it's like an hour and a half. How can it be an EP? Anyway, it's like she is somehow like popular in the alt pop realm, even though I think her music is really not pop friendly at all, especially not now. Like this album, it does have a lot of the same like ambient droning moments as Perverts, but it also does have like more of a return to the catchier moments of Preacher's Daughter. I feel like I mean, these artists have been name dropped for Ethel Cain for a while, but like hearing it, I just think of like Chelsea Wolfe, Soul of Jesus, Lana Del Rey, Grouper, and then also like some of the guitar. I think of Hum, all that, but all that in like a blender. So it's kind of this like I can see how she appeals to Lana Del Rey fans, but I can also see how she appeals to Grouper fans, and I think that's what makes Ethel Cain is that weird middle ground. I'm just gonna run through a few other albums from this week. Another boundary pushing pop record is I don't know if I say her name right, but Amare. She's like her family's from Ghana. She grew up in the US, and it's like this combination of like Western diva pop and African music. And it's just like, I think this new record, my elevator pitch is like, it sounds like FKA Twigs' new album with Afro beats. So really, really fun. Charlie Crockett, insanely prolific country singer, is back with his second album of the year. JID, this rapper from Atlanta who I think is awesome, is back with a new album, and actually Clips have an appearance on this record. Obviously, we've talked about Clips a few times on this show, but it's like the year of Clips. So it's like really exciting to hear that they have a guest verse on this. West Side Gun is also on it. Vince Staples is on it. And then there's also like more pop friendly guests like Ty Dolla $ign and Don Toliver and Jesse Reyes and stuff. So it's a really, really good rap album. And I think coming off July was like a crazy good month for a certain type of rap with like Clips and Tyler's record and Freddie Gibbs and Alchemist. And I think JID record with the Clips first right in there. Another rap record out this week is Shrapnel and Mike Ladd. Mike Ladd is a producer. It's Shrapnel's second of 3 albums coming out this year. Ada Leah has a new album out. It's really beautiful, folky album. And the legendary boom bap producer DJ Premier and Roc Marciano, who's one of the most important and best boom bap torch carriers of the past 15 years, have a collaborative album out. And all of those I talk about, me and Amanda talk about. Amanda talks about the Ada Leah record. In notable releases, over in Indie Basement, Bill talks about the new No Joy album, which is produced by Fire Tools. And it's like this really crazy mix of shoegaze and like more of a kind of trip hop breakbeat, like electronic thing happening. It's like super cool. It's called Bugland, and Jasmine from No Joy made a video for Brooklyn Vegan where she asked Bugs what their favorite album of all time is. So that's fun. He also talks about the new OCs, Wombo, and For Those I Love. And speaking of DJ Premier, this past week, we also got I'll loop back around to the speaking of, but we also got the first single from Ghostface Killah's Supreme Clientele 2, which is the 25 years later sequel to Ghostface's classic record Supreme Clientele, and it's part of Nas's label Mass Appeal's Legend Has It series, which recently began with Slick Rick's first album in over 25 years. Surprisingly good, I thought. Then there was a new Raekwon album, and still to come is an album from Nas and DJ Premier, which is very exciting. DJ Premier produced 3 of the tracks on Illmatic, so I'm really stoked to hear that. A Mobb Deep album, I'm very curious when that was recorded, given the Prodigy's passing. And on that note, Big L also has I'm curious like if that's like must be archival and stuff. And then there's a De La Soul record. So that would be huge news on its own. But yeah, the Ghostface single, it's called Rap Kingpin, sounds like classic Ghostface. Dave, I know you heard the Slick Rick and Raekwon records too, so I assume you're keeping up with the Legend Has It series.
Yeah, I'm really excited about the Legend Has It series actually, with and I'm liking that new Raekwon album, and it came at a perfect time because I'm actually going to see Raekwon tomorrow in Prospect Park here in Brooklyn. He's actually playing Cuban Links in full, celebrating the 30th anniversary of that album. And I'm looking forward to that. But he also said he's going to be playing songs off this new one, which motivated me even more to listen to it. And I like it.
Awesome.
But I also really like that Slick Rick album.
Yeah, I can't believe how good it is. Like, it's interesting because last year we got that like surprisingly good LL Cool J album, and now we get a surprisingly good Slick Rick album. So
yeah, same page. Both. I don't. It feels almost mean to say surprisingly great, but it just, who expected like a great album from Slick Rick in 2025? It just.
I think it's okay to say.
Yeah, and the LL Cool J one as well. It's almost like those are albums that we might be like, oh, I don't even need to listen to that. And cool. I guess that's cool that they put out a new album. And then you're like, somebody tells you, no, it's actually really good. And you're like, oh, yeah, it is actually really good.
Meanwhile, did you see the Will Smith freestyle?
I still have not seen that one.
Oh, instantly famously bad.
Oh,
can't all be winners. One of the biggest song news things that came out this week is that Algernon Cadwallader announced their first album in 14 years. It's called Trying Not to Have a Thought. The lead single is called Hawk. Algernon are like, if you're not familiar, they're the most important band basically of the emo revival of the late 2000s, early 2010s. They reunited a few years ago, and the fact they're even making a new album, I'm shocked. I just did not see it coming. I just kind of thought, I had them in my mind as like they were time and place. The reunion tour has been great, fun to see them again. Just didn't think they'd do a new record. And the new song sounds like classic Algernon, which classic Algernon also sounds like classic Cap and Jazz. But at this point, Algernon really have their own thing going. So it's cool. I think I'm really excited about this.
yeah. I mean, I saw them at BFF Fest last year and they were really great live. And they have that energy still that seem like a young band, so it makes sense that they should have some new music in them too. Well, I mean, what have the members been up to? And
a lot. I mean, Joe is the guitarist of Hop Along. Now, Hop Along have been dormant for a bit though, but he was obviously very active in the years after Algernon's breakup because Hop Along toured like crazy. And Algernon are now on Saddle Creek, which is the label Hop Along have been on since 2015. But also they had a band together, the most of Algernon, called Dogs on Acid, which lasted for a couple of years. There's always various projects. So yeah, they're always doing something. And Joe's also like a really prolific producer. I saw them, the reunion Algernon, with Joyce Manor when Joyce Manor were doing the 10th anniversary for Never Hungover Again, which is also an album Joe produced. And it's always been about the live show for Algernon. I think the records are great, but it's just like, it's all about the live show. And I agree with you. Like they were so sick. And I saw them back in the day a few times, including on their last tour, which was also opening for Joyce Manor, but in a much smaller room. And I've only ever seen Algernon in small rooms. I have vivid memories of just like seeing them on a floor with the crowd circling around them. And it's like small enough to see everybody at once. And seeing them on a huge stage at Brooklyn Steel opening for Joyce Manor with like people forming push pits and stuff was pretty crazy. This week we got 2 new songs from Undeath, a really cool death metal band that we're both big fans of. And we got 2 new songs from Burial, who despite the name is not a metal band. But I'm one of the best electronic musicians ever. I mean, you know, I'm just being silly. But also one of those songs, Jens Lekman noticed samples him, which is great timing for Jens because he also has new songs from a forthcoming new album out this week. Also, Prune, who I think is one of the most underrated indie rock bands around right now. And I think underrated can sometimes come off as a backhanded compliment, but I really mean it because like it kind of blows my mind that this band's not bigger. It's like they're insanely good. Come on, people. And they announced their new album System and the lead single is out and it's typically awesome. That's their second record, I believe. And also AFI announced a new album, which is their first for Run for Cover. I am, as a longtime AFI and longtime Run for Cover fan, pleasantly shocked by this pairing. And AFI have always been into like punk and hardcore as well as 80s goth. And they have an 80s goth sounding side project called Black Audio. But AFI themselves have never sounded as overtly 80s goth as they do on Behind the Clock, the first single from this record, which is called Silver Bleeds the Black Sun. I'm sorry for reading the comments, but I saw some of you on Instagram making fun of me for saying that they went goth as if they hadn't done that already. But like, it's different now. Sorry. Anyway, we actually have an exclusive vinyl variant of this record in our shop. But if you want it, you should act quick, because if it's not sold out by the time you're hearing this, then it will be soon. Lastly, for now, Joan Shelley announced a new album, Real Warmth. Joan is always one of the most consistently great folk singers in recent memory, and her lead single, Everybody, is as amazing as usual. What else happened this week, Dave?
Well, surviving Grateful Dead members celebrated the band's 60th anniversary across 3 huge Dead & Co. shows in San Francisco's Golden Gate Park that saw them joined by Sturgill Simpson, Trey Anastasio of Fish, Billy Strings, and the late Phil Lesh's son, Graham. Whether Edward Sharpe was in the audience is unknown. Flaming Lips and Modest Mouse's co-headlining tour began, and Isaac Brock has been joining the Flaming Lips during encores for a cover of Black Sabbath's War Pigs. No shortage of Black Sabbath covers lately. Meanwhile, Ozzy's cause of death was officially revealed this week as a heart attack. Metallica's Lars Ulrich addressed the rumors that the band have an upcoming Sphere residency, saying, "I'm not going to deny it. It's not signed, sealed, and delivered, but speaking to me and asking my opinion, I would fucking love to do it." Metallica also announced an intimate New York show to celebrate their new Sirius XM channel, which I am going to be away that week. So I'm actually really bummed that I have no chance of going to that intimate New York show, though I did see them when they played Webster Hall. Was that the last time they played an intimate New York show?
Maybe.
So.
We were both there. That was awesome. That was a crazy experience.
Awesome. It's funny. I have a memory of that show of Karina, musician. I don't know if she was as much of a musician at the time, but musician Karina Reichman on the balcony of that show headbanging. It's like, I never forgot that. And funny, the venue that Metallica is playing on this intimate show is where in Anahagamasset, New York. Is that in Long Island?
I think it's Long Island. Yeah. I think you're definitely pronouncing it right.
Karina is actually playing the same venue, headlining, sold out one night earlier or one night later. And she posted on socials that this is like a dream come true, that she's playing one night away from Metallica. She'll obviously stay around or come early for that one too. And I thought that was cool. There's a new line of Green Day themed Garbage Pail Kids, which I love Garbage Pail Kids. I don't know, maybe people would have been like, known what that was more if it had been Pokemon cards or something, but I'm down for the Green Day Garbage Pail Kids.
No, it should have been Green Day themed Labubu's.
There you go. Now that would have been a sensation. Keeping up with David Byrne and Haley Williams, not the first time even on this episode that David Byrne has come up together and apart, is proving to be a full-time job. This week they confirmed they recorded a song together for Netflix's The Twits, which is based on Roald Dahl's 1980 children's book of the same name. And it's one of 4 songs Byrne contributes to the film. That follows David and Haley's upcoming collaboration on David's new solo album. And this news came as Haley also put out a new video for Ego Death at a bachelorette party, one of the 17 new songs she dropped last week that we discussed in depth on last week's episode. And ending on a sad note, Cobalt and Man's Gin leader Eric Wonder has died at 42, as confirmed by posts from Blake Judd of Knockmistium and Ken Sorcerin of Abigail Williams. The multiple Cobalt albums that came out in 2007, 2009, and 2016 are not only some of Andrew and I's favorite metal albums, but a big part of Brooklyn Vegan metal coverage. Everything Eric worked on was always big for us. And in fact, in 2012, Eric even did a guest post on Brooklyn Vegan for us where he interviewed Unsane. So really sad. And fans of heavy music, I definitely recommend you go give the Cobalt albums Gin and Slow Forever a spin right now in his honor.
Yeah, it's extremely sad. Cobalt have basically been quiet since Slow Forever in 2016. And yeah, I mean, you said it, but that's one of my favorite metal albums. I mean, that was our number 2 album of that year. Like, that's just one of my favorite albums of the past like decade or so. And I feel like I'm often the person being like, even if you're not a metalhead, like, and so I feel like, you know, even if you're not a metalhead, I think Slow Forever is just like a really great heavy rock album. And couldn't recommend it enough. If you know, if you haven't heard Cobalt yet, too bad we're not talking about them under better circumstances, but you know, it's never too late.
And that has been another week of BV Weekly. Go check out the Brooklyn Vegan shop, because we have, in addition to that AFI, if it's not sold out yet, a lot of new exclusive variants, like the new horror album and the new Alex G album. We still have copies of the upcoming Super Chunk album, and Descendants reissues, Minus the Bear reissues, much more. Shop.brooklynvegan.com. Talk to you next week.
Thanks for tuning in. Dave and I will be back every Friday morning with new episodes of BV Weekly. And in between the episodes, you can always get much more from us at brooklynvegan.com, on all of our social media, including Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok. You can pick up records from us at shop.brooklynvegan.com. And if you like what you hear, tell your friends about us, subscribe to the show, give us a good rating. All that little stuff goes a really long way. It really helps us a lot, and we really appreciate it. Thanks so much to Joe D'Agostino from Cymbals E Guitars and Empty Country for the great theme song. Our mix engineer, Nick Gray. Thank you again, and see you next time.